missing that. Maybe they were conscious. They didn't care. Because
Right.
previously they had done the very same thing with respect to surviving spouse medical coverage out in the private bus line. Well, there were a few changes. One was Aetna coming in as a carrier, as the main carrier. Sorry, from switching
Right.
from Blue Cross Blue Shield and other carriers to Aetna. That was around 2012, I believe.
Yes.
But then in 2016, they made Aetna the the um, the administrator of the benefits, which is a very different thing from being a carrier or provider. Um, in fact, the I'm looking right now at a newsletter that the local sent out, dated October of 2016, and the headline says health benefits. Aetna wins the contract to administer local 100 health benefits.
And that was when?
That was October of 2016 under Samuelson.
Okay.
And the opening the opening salvo in that newsletter, it says the right to unilaterally change health carriers was given to the MTA by the union in the 2002 contract negotiations. The MTA has once again exercised this contractual right to bring in a new health benefit provider. But Aetna had been a health benefit provider for previous years. They're using a kind of sleight of hand here to
I'm listening to that. It don't sound right. Yeah.
right to they move from the headline says that Aetna wins the contract to administer the benefit, but they open up talking about health carriers, providers, which is two different things.
Right.
Right.
Administer and the provider. Yeah. Okay. I got you.
Right. So and they open it up by blaming it on the 2002 contract. Now you know when they do that, you know they're expecting bad news, because if they thought that the change to Aetna administering the contract would be a good thing, they would take ownership of that, take responsibility. Once they open up by saying that this was due to the 2002 contract, then it means that they expect bad news here. This is a warning flag for bad news. I think that it is often misunderstood that the health benefit situation and problems facing transit workers just concerns retired transit workers, and particularly those who are Medicare eligible, meaning age 65 and above.
Right.
And that the call that is going out now is about active members standing in solidarity with past workers, with retired workers.
Mm-hmm.
That's a misunderstanding, and that would be a misstatement, because the impacts on actives are numerous. First of all, it is obvious that every active member will eventually become a retired member, so that is self-evident.
Right. Well, you would think it is, but
Right.
apparently.
And if you're short-sighted and you don't see the importance of protecting yourself in retirement age, all you have to do is look next door, talk to your parents and your loved ones who are over 50 or over 60, and you can see you will hear all sorts of stories about how rough things are, trying to live off retiree money, and how bad things are for health benefits, and how people have to make very ugly choices between food and residence and medical care.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of stories about bad medical episodes or events totally wiping out people's financial security and savings and so forth, and people ended up even homeless, destitute as a result of medical events. So it is self-evident. I mean that you have to be concerned about your retirement. After all, when you take the transit job versus going in the public sector, in the right, one of the reasons is that you get a guaranteed pension, right? Unlike many people in the public sector who may have 401k plans. In
Right.
transit, you have a defined benefit pension, right? Um, that's one of the reasons you take a public sector job, because you're thinking about your retirement. Similarly, in transit, there was a defined benefit medical coverage. So that is one reason. It's unfortunate that we even have to focus on that. After we have to explain the obvious that everybody gets old.
I know.
Right?
I feel you. Like, you have to explain the obvious nowadays. You shouldn't
Right.
have to, but you have to. You just simply have to.
Right. But the more important point, I think, or an equally important point, is that the attacks on retirees is simply the first stop for attacks on the active members.
Right.
And the impacts of those attacks on active members are already showing up in the language of the contract, in the provisions of the contract, and I will go into some of that in a minute. So the current contract that people are under has increases in co-pays for prescriptions, for instance. In Once you step out of generic drugs, the co-pays increase by 100% and by 175%.
Right.
It also has for the first time, a $100 charge for emergency room visits for active members.
Right.
Now, as I explained previously, obviously, no one goes to a hospital, certainly not in New York or anywhere else for that matter. No one goes into an emergency room unless they have to, because
Right.
the emergency rooms are known for long stays and and bad experiences.
Yeah, you don't want to go to an emergency room in Brooklyn.
Right. Okay. No one goes unless you have to, unless you're in real trouble or you think that you're in real trouble.
Yeah.
And by attaching a $100 fee to that, it means that it's intended as a deterrent to
Deterrent.
discourage you from getting treatment when you desperately need it.
Would you consider that a form of diminishment from the current or from the previous contract?
Absolutely, that is a diminishment of the emergency room visits. Will be one of the first things that you would always protect, and
Right.
there was no cost associated with it in certainly while I was there, and I
Right.
left in 2009.
Okay.
So that first appears in the contract that ran from 2019 to 2023. The president at that time, and the name on the contract is Tony Utano.
Okay.
He negotiated to include that provision. So that's a direct impact on actives. And looking at the additional issues in that contract, which is again 2019 to 2023. One of the provisions calls for what they call a verification audit every 5 years. Beginning, the first one is in 2020, and then every 5 years thereafter. That's what the language says. So the next one is supposed to be in 2025, next year. Now, the important thing here is that the last verification audit that was conducted knocked off. I double checked my numbers. It knocked off something like 7,500 souls from medical coverage under our plan. And how it works is that if you have, for instance, 35,000 members in the MTA, it provides benefits for what is called the covered population, which may be more like 200,000 or 300,000 people, meaning spouses and family members,
Right.
dependent family members. So the last audit they did, for all sorts of frivolous reasons, they knocked people off and put the burden on you to reestablish your eligibility. So they required people to go and find marriage certificates, death certificates, birth certificates, dig up your tax filings, your residency, your home ownership papers, and all sorts of stuff to reestablish connections between a covered member and their listed family members.
Is that part of the purge?
Yes, that was a purge that occurred. That occurred previously. I think it began in 2010 or 2011, and
Okay.
it ended up being settled through a stipulation in 2012 and continued into 2013, where members had gone for long periods of time without coverage. Members eligible dependents went without coverage, were knocked off coverage, and of course that can turn into some terrible,
Yeah.
terrible experiences.
Again, Roger,
Mhm.
we know what the terrible experiences are, but for again obvious reasons, you might want to give an example of what one of those terrible experiences can be.
Well, for instance, if you have a child that is not carrying your name, and many people they have all sorts of names. In my family, I have
Mhm.
bunches of names.
Mhm.
And if your child is not carrying your name, so the connection is not that obvious.
Right.
But is or some other the eligible person in your household that was listed for your health benefits, then you would have to go and reestablish it through paperwork that they required. They determined the paperwork that was required. But if that child was getting any kind of critical care, any type of critical care, or non-critical care, for instance, for special needs,
Mhm.
right? All of those things would have been suspended. You would no longer have access to it. And critical care, you can think about the wide range of areas where you have children that have to see their medical physicians on a weekly or bi-weekly or monthly basis for maintenance. All of those things got knocked off. 7,000 people were removed and were forced to reestablish that eligibility. So that's an impact of the audit. Now, the problem is that the MTA did this audit on its own. The union was late to the dance as usual and was playing catch up from behind only after members started kicking and screaming about their loved ones being removed from coverage. Again, always late to the dance because nobody's watching the store.
Mhm.
Uh, and one of the things that this raises is that when I before well, when we um, negotiated for the health benefits to be changed to a guaranteed benefit versus a contribution based benefit, one of the things that we put in place was a senior labor management committee with 3 trustees from the MTA and 3 trustees from the union that specifically included the union president, the union secretary treasurer, and the union's director of membership services. Those were the named trustees.
Okay.
And it required that this committee meet every 3 months, every quarter, and to address any and all issues affecting health benefits for members. And if there was any dispute, then the dispute would be taken before the contract arbitrator. Now, that's just, let me mention that what this meant is that the exact same recourse that was available under the health benefit trust was retained under the new arrangement. The only challenge you had under the health benefit trust, which was also equally trusted by 3 members on both sides, the only recourse you had was to take a dispute to the arbitrator. We kept that in place. And what happened is that when Samuelson took over in January 2010 and January 2011 into 2012, there were no meetings whatsoever of this committee. While all these changes, including the audit, was ramped up and went into full swing. Again, nobody was watching the store. There should have been at least the language and the provision calls for at least 4 meetings a year.
Right. So as they came in, no more meetings.
You could have more, right? They weren't even meeting, much less. So they had no radar. So you're flying without the radar, right? It's nighttime and you're flying without the radar. Of course, you're going to bump into mountains.
Exactly.
Right? And and that is actually what happened. So the audit knocked off a lot of people off coverage. It made everything more difficult in terms of the delivery of health benefits. Again, and this was affecting actives.
Right.
So this was the kind of forewarning that bad things were to come. And in the current contract, 2023 to 2025, the contract pivots to open attack on pre-Medicare retirees, on Medicare eligible retirees, I'm sorry. For retirees over age 65 who are eligible for Medicare, they were all mandated as of January 1st of 2024. All such retirees are mandated into an Aetna managed care plan, right?
So you're saying mandated,
mandated in the sense, and the language is very, very crafty. What the language does not say, and what the executive board was not told, is that they were being removed out of traditional Medicare. Traditional Medicare is between you, your doctors, and the government.
Right.
If your doctor recommend a procedure or medication or medical equipment or whatever, it goes to the government Medicare people, and they 99% of the time is approved.
Right.
Medicare Advantage inserts a third party in there that they then basically put in as to manage your doctor, and they make their money by saving money by denying care, delaying care, requiring pre-approvals and prior authorizations where it did not exist before. And the record is extensive all the way up to the US Congress. That this has cost Medicare billions upon billions of dollars in funds supposed to be available for retiree care, for elderly care.
Correct.
That money has ended up in the pockets of these private companies, such as Aetna.
There is a video with I believe her name is Elizabeth Warren who explains just that.
Yes.
It was built to save money and it ended up costing billions.
Congress created Medicare Advantage on the premise that private insurers would make the program more efficient and would save the federal government money. Well, that didn't happen.
Costing billions. The Medicare Advantage plan was a plan. The Medicare Advantage was a provision in the law that permitted the raiding of Medicare funds by private companies. Many of these are companies that have been complaining for years that Medicare is an unsustainable entitlement, is the word that they use.
Yeah.
It to be stopped or changed. So the very people that were complaining that it was unsustainable then proceeded to raid the funds, and to put the money in their pockets instead. Which is essentially what happened. So what Elizabeth Warren was explaining and what you mentioned is not that it was the justification for creating Medicare Advantage was to make the delivery of medical care more effective,
right,
efficient and effective.
Right.
That was so that's like the fox getting into the hen house, promising to more easily consume the chickens, right? Which is what they actually ended up doing. Anyway, I digress. So
Right.
I've listed here a number of impacts on actives, and there's stuff that's and I would argue that this is just the opening salvo. Being more increases in co-pays, because that door has now been opened. Where those co-pays were locked in 2002, that door is now wide open. Now there is a legacy where every contract you can adjust the co-pays, where they were not allowed to do that from 2002, the 2005 contract, the 2008 contract, 8-9 contract. They were not allowed to even touch that. They were not allowed to raise this, because the agreement said that the MTA had to foot the bill, pay the cost, provide all of the benefits, including some improvements, and foot the entire cost. That arrangement has been changed, upset. So now what you have is these co-pays, the emergency room charge, and again, all they have to do is get away with it, and the transit authority will behave exactly as the transit authority is designed to behave. They're gonna go further with every.
Exactly. It's a business.
Absolutely.
The whole thing is the bottom line.
And the thing is that they were very upset over the change in 2002, because the change required them to foot the bill regardless of any medical inflation or any increase in cost. And the main leverage that employers have always had at the negotiation table is their claim that they have an inability to pay because of the rising cost of, and the number one item is healthcare. Right? So they bring that to the table, and they basically accuse you of trying to bankrupt the authority or bankrupt the government by requiring the government to carry the full weight of medical care, and that you need to share in those costs, or the medical care need to be pared down or cut to, in order to control and manage it better from the standpoint of cost. That's the leverage that they bring to the table. Long before you discuss wages, you have to settle the question of how are you going to pay to keep your members healthy, right? So the 2002 negotiations removed that leverage from the MTA completely. It said that you can administer the benefit, but you can't change it, and you must maintain it, all of the benefits. Right? So that is what you call a guaranteed benefit plan.
Now, was that
exist?
was that up until the end of the contract, or was that
no
carried for life?
That was period, because it was a guaranteed benefit plan, right? And that was the explicit conversation, and that was in previous contracts. The language would say for the life of the contract, or given a given date on which the contract ended. That's exactly what previous contracts said. It gave the date when certain terms would come to an end, or certain health benefits or whatever. And that was removed from the 2002 contract. So the problem is that the MTA was very upset with that change in 2002 to where they were required to guarantee the benefits themselves and couldn't touch it, and could no longer use it as leverage at the table, and have always wanted to change that. Well, the opportunity to change it only arose once Samuelson took over.
They jumped right on it.
Right? And they started with the audit, began in 2010. And they had a fight over that for over 2 years, into 2013. And then it was stepped up, including moving in Aetna as the main provider of benefits, from Blue Cross Blue Shield and a number of other providers that were available up until prior to 2012. So Aetna became the provider of the benefits. And then in 2016, the MTA went a step further and named Aetna as the administrator of all the benefits. Now, there's a difference between being a carrier or provider. Aetna had been around and had been one of the listed provider at New York City Transit and OA for at least into the 90s, if not the 80s, right? So there's a difference between being a provider or carrier of benefits, that you're contracted to provide X number of benefits and so on and so forth, to being the administrator, right, where people have to now answer to you because you're administering the benefit. And you have your own corporate mechanisms to administer the benefit versus our contractual mechanisms with the employer. So the MTA went a step further and named Aetna as the administrator of the benefit, and the union gave that move its blessings. The union put out a flyer in October of 2016 declaring that pursuant to its contractual rights that the MTA had given Aetna the power to administer our benefits. And that claim about contractual rights is total nonsense. It's not true. It's not the case. All right? But what's important here also is that the union itself was going on record saying that what the MTA was doing was legitimate, was contractual, was correct, and that had the right to do it and the power to do it. The union itself was shooting its own members in the foot and removing its ability to challenge anything that Aetna did or the MTA did with respect to the administration of these benefits. That is in fact that's 2016. So Aetna
and that affects everybody, right? Not just the retirees.
Actually, it primarily affects actives.
Yeah.
right? And that's the other thing. When Aetna experiments with what it can get away with respect to prior approvals, prior authorizations, delays in your healthcare, denials of your healthcare, denial of equipment. I saw some of your videos where I think the lady name was Rosalind Carr, and another one
Mhm.
was Rivera, where they were denied Julio was denied rehabilitation care.
Yeah, he had to actually leave
Right,
Aetna and
right.
go to traditional.
And Rosalind Carr was denied some type of heart equipment
Right, well, she
for
had to
heart
wear.
condition.
Well, they delayed the approval of her heart equipment and gave her a vest to wear.
Right,
In the meanwhile, she's out in Texas where it's 100 degrees.
right. So they gave
And,
her a hugger rather than the recommended equipment, the equipment recommended
right.
by the doctor. So my point is they deny equipment and save money that way. So
Mhm.
that what active members need to understand is what they're doing is that they're experimenting with 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 mechanisms that they will aim at you. That's what they're doing. They're preparing to come at you, and if they want to come at a at a tens of thousands of active members, the easier way to do it is to go by route of attacking the retirees and then exporting those methods into active care.
Yeah, they
Prior
tested it out.
approvals, prior authorizations, the equipment, denial of care, and denial of
When I spoke
equipment,
about
and
the
so forth.
2%
Right?
increase
If
in the
there's
medical
money to be made, they will
contributions
show up.
and to 4%,
So that door
the
is now being
4% to
flung wide
4%,
open,
and we fought that off and the chance to
and you will
win.
have hell to
We
pay
got
because
more
they
increases
now
on medical coverage.
they have a
We have
seat
a
front and
change,
center in your
and the
health benefits,
change
in your health
is
benefits,
only for
with
people
respect to
who are
the delivery of
65
your health
and
benefits.
retired.
So it is
If
it
you're
is
here
it
in
is
this
it is
room, this
it
conversation has no
directly
effect on you
concerns
because you're
active
an active
members, is my
member.
point.
Correct. Yeah.
Not down the road, not in 10, 15, 20 years when you retire. It affects you now. And you can see it in your contractual provisions and and more people are going to be complaining about the problems that they're encountering getting their health benefits serviced.
So let me put a pin right there about they can see it in the contract. We're gonna get back to that real quick. But
Mhm.
what you're saying is right, and I'm pretty sure you probably seen the videos themselves where the current president Richie Davis is telling the members of Shopgate that anybody in this room, meaning the actives, that this doesn't directly affect them.
The contract. When I spoke about the 2% increase in medical contributions and to 4%, the 4% to 4%, and we fought that off and the chance to win. We got more increases on medical coverage. We have a change, and the change is only for people who are 65 and retired. If you're here in this room, this conversation has no effect on you because you're an active member.
It's only for people who are retired. So you're saying that he's basically just lying to his members.
Right. Apart from it being bad policy and politics as a union leader,
Correct.
he is lying.
Thank you.
Um, the change does affect active members. Um, Aetna's entire operation is based on profit, of course,
Thank you.
and it will affect active members not just when they retire, but it's because once they establish a regime of prior approvals and authorizations and denials and of care and of equipment. Once that logic is established, that you establish a certain rationale for
Mhm.
why equipment is denied, for why you have an algorithm that says for the following reasons we are allowed to deny recommended equipment or recommended care, right? Then what prevents that from being applied? In fact, you can argue then that you are now compelled to apply this uniformly.
Exactly.
Otherwise, you're suggesting that you've been applying it in a discriminatory manner, right? And there's laws against discriminating against people over the age of 55, right?
Right.
It's typically called elder abuse. But my point is that once you have established a regimen, a regime that establishes the standards for approvals and authorizations and care and so forth, then it's just a matter of time before they decide that let us at least incrementally begin to apply this to active members. Right? So
Exactly.
it is silly to say that this doesn't affect active members.
Active. I mean,
Right?
I knew that the minute he blurted it out of his mouth. I'm like, what?
Right.
How can that be?
Right.
But,
right. So I mean, the whole point is that you come up with these things in order to establish a new standard of care.
right.
The purpose of all of these changes is for that, to establish a new standard of care, new standards of care, that hinges upon how could I best make more money. That's Aetna's point of view. How could I make more money to deliver to my shareholders, right?
Right. So you said that the active members could see this in the contract, right? Where could they get their hands on the contract? Some of them don't even know where to go to even get a contract to look at.
Well, they don't send me contracts. I think that any of the current activists and officers can they have blocked my access to local 100 bulletins and communications for a very long time.
So
So I think it's some of this stuff is posted on the website if you know how to search it, and maybe somebody can do a tutorial telling people how to search the local 100 website. I am not in a position to do that. But some of this stuff is on the website. Some of the stuff you can do by searching other publicly accessible websites, such as the LMRDA, Labor Management Reporting and Disclosure Act, which is where the union is required to submit annual reports to the government regarding its expenditures and the contracts they're under, and so some of that is there.
So
again,
they can't just go to their union rep and ask for one?
Ask for details about the medical plan and so forth.
Right.
Most of the union reps don't even know. Right?
Okay.
But by moving it to a third party administrator, it makes that information even far more removed.
Right.
So now you got to go through the business services center, right? And then the business services center doesn't answer the Aetna doesn't answer to the business services center. Aetna is a corporation unto itself, right? So you have to jump through all sorts of hurdles to get original documents, but it can be got, and hopefully this lawsuit that is being filed by the retirees will flush out some of this information. But I think to cut a long story short, I think an appropriate thing would be to get someone to provide a tutorial on your show regarding how to get information as a transit worker.
Sounds like something to do. Definitely gonna get on top of that.
Yeah.
But just the people that are watching, the road warriors that are watching, if you have access to certain things that Roger may not, you might want to slide it over to him.
Like the height, like for instance, I'm looking at the current contract, right? That brought in Aetna as the that mandated everybody into the Medicare, into Aetna's Medicare Advantage plan. And the language, the entire paragraph governing this is a short paragraph that is very, very misleading. It says commencing with open enrollment for the plan year beginning January of 2024, Medicare eligible retirees will be entitled to enroll in either of two TW enhanced retiree benefits coverage. And it goes on to mention that you have plan A and plan B. Sorry, you have option 1 and option 2. One of two options. What it doesn't say is that these two options are replacing traditional Medicare.
Right.
Now, you would think that that's an essential piece of information. What they're saying is that the traditional Medicare, if you've been retired since the 1980s or the 90s or the 2005, 2010, you have been on traditional Medicare. What they're not telling you here is your traditional Medicare coverage has just been ended. They didn't tell you, that is nowhere even hinted at here.
No, it actually seems like they're giving you an option.
Additional, that they've given you enhancement, an additional something.
Right.
And they didn't inform the executive board either when the board recommended this for voting. Right? So if you look at the language carefully, it says Medicare eligible title and retirees will be entitled to enroll. Again, it sounds like an add-on. It sounds like you're getting something, an additional something you didn't have before. It doesn't say that we're taking away your traditional Medicare and compelling you into these option 1s and option 2s. Right?
It also sounds like
it is disingenuous. Unions are not supposed to operate in this hide the ball type of way, right? Or pick from a bag with blindly. So that's the type of that right away should be a red flag that tells you something is up. I mean, as I go through these contracts, I mean, I'm just getting the need to do that. There are lots of changes that they're just slipping regarding workers' compensation. And other things that they're just allowing the MTA to basically privatize stuff, put it out, so the MTA itself hide behind the curtain and introduces third-party providers to do different things for them, including in the area of workers' compensation when people get injured and so forth. But there are lots of stuff in these contracts. Like in the 2000, and I'm looking at the last contract that Samuelson signed off on was the 2017 to 19 contract. And one of the only provision on health here, the opening provision on health, says that the existing transition to Aetna shall continue to be advanced cooperatively. This is kind of very strange language to put in a contract. So Samuelson put Aetna into the contract for the first time. Aetna specifically, right? You have a whole bunch you have 15 providers out there, all of whom have done business with the MTA.
So he's kind of guaranteeing Aetna the business.
He put Aetna in the contract,
right?
In the 2017 to 19 contract. And it talks about the existing transition to Aetna shall continue to be advanced cooperatively, which means the union is agreeing, is sanctioning Aetna taking over everything. And
so in the future, if they decide to go with a better offer, they can't.
Right,
but they'll have to have a fight.
But this was to lock in Aetna. I think that they knew what was coming. The MTA wanted to move the administration of health benefits over to a third-party provider so that MTA could then hide behind the curtain and say it wasn't us. The administrator did that. And then they also knew that what Aetna does is Aetna scrubs the list of the eligibility list and knocks people off. What Aetna does is institute prior authorizations and higher rate of disapprovals and denials of care and of equipment, medical care, medical equipment. they know that this is that's the business that Aetna is in. So they know that down the road that's what's coming, no question.
Right.
So that's where we're at.
So one question that a lot of people are concerned about is, with all this going on, how can it be fixed?
Well, I think the first order of business is you can't ask the people that created the problem to fix the problem that they created, because it will require them to first of all admit that they messed up or that they deliberately screwed you, and they're not going to do either.
Right.
So the first order of business, I think, is you have to create a pathway to change by changing the administration. Now, absent a change in the administration, you need a powerful, ongoing protest movement on the streets of transit workers on the ground, not allowing business as usual while they're being raped. Right? I'll give you an example. In dealing with the Transit Authority out of control disciplinary system, during my time, there were a number of very militant demonstrations staged outside Livingston Street. Back in those days was also 370 J Street and 2 Broadway, denouncing the Transit Authority for basically conducting what we used to call a plantation system of justice. And denouncing the massive amount of discipline that was being imposed on transit workers and making it a very public issue. So we got a lot of press attention on that issue, and we raised public outrage over the MTA's mistreatment of people, of employees, which the riders then sympathized with, because they associated the mistreatment of the employees with the mistreatment that they themselves were subjected to riding the system on a daily basis. And as a result, the union leadership at the time was forced to negotiate contract language that purportedly eased the disciplinary system. That's how things came about, such as a 3-track system for discipline, safety, time and attendance, and then everything else in terms of how penalties are assessed, and a number of other changes into what they call progressive discipline and so on and so forth. But that came about because of very militant demonstrations by the rank and file on the streets. So it is possible to force a bad administration to make changes, to go to the authority and insist upon changes. But that is not sustainable until you change the administration, because if they're brought kicking and screaming to make these changes, they're going to be terrible at policing it and enforcing it, which is what happened. The previous administrations before me was terrible at policing the language that they themselves negotiated and enforcing it, because they had been made to do it reluctantly. So you ultimately need a change in administration, but in the meantime you need people to be up in rage over the health benefits. We when we took over in 2002, they were threatening to cut our health benefits. Again, as I mentioned before, we staged mass demonstrations that shut down Midtown Manhattan during rush hour. We would put 13, 14, 15, 16,000 transit workers out on the street on Madison Avenue,
blocking traffic and everything like
completely
that.
shut down the Midtown Manhattan traffic. This was in the lead up to the 2002 contract, because they were threatening to cut our medical benefits. But again, that was under my administration, and we organized those protests. But so you can go either way, either before and after. This is about having a mobilized membership, right? Rather than all of these vice presidents and people you have now, they're basically selfie officers. Every time you see them, they're taking a selfie,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But you don't see them putting out attacking the MT, attacking management, or mobilizing members to challenge management. You don't see nobody in the administration doing that, from the president down to the vice presidents and the chairman. None of them do that, right? And that is what is required in order to, if the MTA, if the MTA is not going to make positive changes that benefit members, unless they are compelled to,
Right.
unless they see that they will face adverse consequences for not doing it, right? So you have to deliver that. You have to bring that fight.
You bring me to
There's no easy answer except that way.
right. You bring me to a question that's been lingering for the past maybe a year or two about the Taylor law. A lot of people out there kind of feel like after the strike from 2005 that we gave up our rights to strike. Jesus, they gave that. They feel like after we finished the strike in 2005 that we no longer have the right to strike. Is that true?
We never had the right to strike. That's the definition. Before the Taylor law and under the Taylor law, you don't have the right to. You not only don't have the right to strike, you don't have the right to engage in what the law calls, what the Taylor law calls, concerted activity is the term that they use.
Okay.
And concerted activity could include sick-outs, slowdowns, any of those type of things are considered is group activity, concerted activity,
Right.
are prohibited under the law. We knew that in 1980 when we went on strike. We knew that in 2005 when we went on strike. Right? The point is you got to be prepared to deal with the consequences.
Right.
When we were people that look like me and you were once slaves or near slaves, it was illegal to protest slavery. But slavery was ended by the opposition to slavery, not by waiting until the slave owners had a change of heart. Right? So it's always opposition to bad things and the demand for justice and equality that drives change. So so people who argue that you can't do this and you can't do that is people who don't want to do this and don't want to do that, and they want to find an excuse. Right? So after the strike in 2000, first of all, the strike in 2005 was by everyone who's or practitioners in the business of fighting bosses, practitioners, people in the know, right, will tell you that the strike was very successful and that it was a high point in the labor movement nationally. We won on the issue that we went out on strike on. We went out on strike saying we will not eat our unborn. We were not going to give up future transit workers, right? We were not going to impose upon them an inferior pension where they will be paying 6% towards their pension, which is what you're paying almost now. And we will not allow the retirement age to be increased. Right?
Was that tier 6 right there that you're talking about?
I'm sorry?
Was that tier 6 that you were fighting against?
Exactly. Tier 6, we struck to block tier 6. And we were able to block it from the time of the strike in 2005 until 2012 when it was instituted under Samuelson and Governor Cuomo.
So let me ask you this. Did that break your heart?
What?
That it ended up getting tier 6 anyway?
Absolutely. It was very, very distressing and disappointing that exactly what we struck over, they end up getting without a shot being fired.
Without even, yeah, wow.
You know what I mean? And understand something. Cuomo was able to impose this throughout the public sector in 2012.
Mhm.
Meanwhile, in 2005, when they tried to do that, we blocked it single-handedly. Not all the public sector, but transit workers. We
Right.
shut down the city and blocked
Shut
them
it
from
down.
imposing Tier 6. Right? And those members who say, well, we paid fines, this and the other. Well, you know, put on your big boy drawers and your big girl drawers and man up. You
Mhm.
want to fight, but you don't want scratches, and you want to complain about getting a little punch here and a little punch there. But what kind of fighter are you? The fighter that doesn't want to you want gain without pain? You know?
Yeah.
Come on. You know,
Exactly.
so the point is that you have to be prepared to if you want to make gains, you got to be prepared to deal with the pain that comes with it. Right? You know, you want rain without thunder and lightning,
Right.
come on.
So the next union leaders should be prepared to possibly do some jail time if a strike is needed.
Well, the jail time is the minor thing. It's small stuff. That's small
Well, for
stuff.
you it might be, but you know,
Well, no,
some people.
no. The more impactful things for us in 2005 was the fine against the union, which was
Right.
intended to cripple and destroy the union, and
Right.
the removal of dues checkoff, meaning of
Right.
the union's economic
Backbone.
right. So those were more impactful. But I do believe that if you have to be prepared to do whatever is necessary,
Correct.
right?
Right.
Including strike. And by the way, we challenge the penalties and the strike. We challenge that before the international at the UN. The UN has the international ILO, the International Labor Organization, that adjudicates issues between employers and management globally. It's part of the UN Charter. And they ruled in our favor with respect to the strike and ordered the state to compensate the union for the penalties and stuff in the strike. So we won. People don't know this, but we actually continue to fight that this was what they did with us was illegal, and we won that. They never implemented it or followed the instruction. But in any event, my point is that if you don't want the necessary sacrifices that it takes to win your freedom, then maybe you do deserve your situation.
Right. Absolutely.
Only those who insist upon their rights will get them on. Maybe that's all who's entitled to those rights.
Yeah. Like I said, closed mouths don't get fed.
Yeah, I mean, so if you want, anyway. So I've said it. If I keep saying it, I might get some more enemies here because I am intolerant.
I mean, you should be used to that by now. You know.
My point is that I was prepared to walk the walk, not just talk the talk, and I have the battle scars to show it, and I'm speaking here to all of the ballsy transit workers who like to talk a lot of shit on all the shithouse lawyers in transit who have a lot to say about all the things that they would do and then they've never really stood up to a boss. I'd been suspended many times, but that last time I was fired by an arbitrator, terminated, and I remained fired. But transit workers elected me because at that time transit workers identified with what I was made to go through by transit and by the union, right?
I think the culture back then was way different than it is now, though.
Right. Well, there was more sense of solidarity and of shared interests because the transit was beating up on everybody.
Right.
You know, back in I don't know what the numbers are now, but they were on an annual basis, there were like 16,000 disciplinary actions filed against transit workers on an annual basis back then. 16,000. I guess the point I was making is that in those days, and still to some extent today, they have all sorts of arbitrary and absurd rules. which we got rid of in the 2002 contract as well. You know, that's how the 70-30 split came about, meaning that the 70% of the employees, transit workers, with the better attendance records, cannot be visited at home.
Yep.
And not required to have doctor's lines and those type of rules. Those things came about in the 2002 contract.
Interesting.
Right? But before that, you could have been written up every trial, and people were written up. Thousands and thousands were written up. You could be written up for not calling in an hour or 2 hours, depending on your department, before you go sick. You could be written up for leaving your home to go to the pharmacy for medication without calling in to command center or control, right? You can be written up from, if they're following and tracking you, you could be written up for not returning home when you leave the pharmacy, but going to the grocery and not calling to tell them you're going to the grocery, or going to drop a bag of groceries off to your parents, your elderly mother. You could be written up, and people were written up for all sorts of things like that. You could be written up at each and every stage, you know. So they were, so they found a way to write everybody up on something, because you can't, you run afoul of these laws very easily. So everybody was written up for, especially for time and attendance. So we had to straighten out the whole time and attendance situation, and made it illegal for them to even visit you for 70% of the members. You know, so anyway, we can go on at length on these things, but
yeah, I think we got most of what they want covered.
Yeah, you can just go back to it and pick and choose, because you have some work to do.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Roger. Appreciate that.
Sure. Yeah.